Well, let's talk to a local parent now, Denise Geary from Derry, whose daughter Rebecca has complex needs, including autism, and says restrictions had a huge impact on Rebecca. Good morning to you, Denise.
Good morning,
I
Dean.
mean, it's a period in our lives that we don't really necessarily like to remember or talk about. I mean, it's important to reflect on how it impacted on our young people. Talk me through what that period was like for Rebecca.
Well, I suppose, Dean, as we know at the time, the implications were unknown, and schools, I suppose, and other places were closing. So that created a worry in us, because obviously no one knew how transmissible COVID was at the time. So Rebecca, as you said, has complex needs and attended a special school at the time. So there's a real genuine fear about obviously the health. A lot of the children would have been vulnerable. And Rebecca has obviously her own needs as well. But it has had a massive detrimental effect on Rebecca. And to be honest, we're still paying the price for what happened 5 years later.
Really?
Rebecca's anxiety, has really, really increased. During COVID, she was absolutely terrified. And because obviously schools were closed for such a long period of time, trying to get a child with autism, to let go of the fact that if you go out, you might die, or, somebody else that you love might die. Trying to convince her then to go back to school was really, really difficult. And to be honest, she never actually went back full time after that. So we have paid a huge price to the point where it also impacted on everyday things as well, where that Christmas, Santa wasn't allowed to come to our house because she was so afraid of even Santa coming in. So there was a genuine fear that has taken her years and years, and 5 years later, we're still dealing with the effects of school closures, and also the loss of all her therapies that she would have got, in school, like speech therapy and things like that. So yeah, it has had a massive impact on our lives.
It's really stark when you map all of that out, Denise. And do you remember at the time, the guidance being clear, being unclear for parents like yourself?
Oh, absolutely not. I mean, Boris Johnson himself, said that they hadn't. I suppose in hindsight, he's saying that they probably shouldn't have closed schools, and that that predictions are now really grim over what has happened, and that it should have been school closure should have been a last resort rather than an early default. But again, as we know, that if we fail to plan, we plan to fail. And obviously, like, we can look back at the context, and it was important to keep people safe, but it definitely has, that lack of planning has really impacted children, even now, 5 years later. So
Yeah. We're going to hear from the Northern Ireland Children's Commissioner, Chris Quinn, after 8:30 this morning about this very subject. Denise, I mean, how important is it, in your view, as a parent, that voices from Northern Ireland are heard during this COVID inquiry?
well, I mean, it obviously had an impact on education. I have a younger daughter too as well, and she was P7 at the time when schools just closed, very abruptly, and she missed out on, the key, I suppose, the key events in primary seven. And it caused a massive disruption for children in Northern Ireland too for nearly 2 years. And when you think about it, 2 years is a very large part of a young child's life. And especially for children, I'm sure Chris is aware too, children who are young carers in Northern Ireland, when there was no school, there was no escape. So, they very much were at home with a sibling with special needs 24/7. And also they had a fear that something could happen to their sibling with special needs. So, it is important that their voices are heard as well. And, that obviously that in Northern Ireland, schools are more prepared if something like this happens in the future.
And when you think back to the homeschooling element of the pandemic as well, it had a huge impact on the young people, but an awful lot of pressure on the parents as well.
Oh, absolutely. it's very difficult to try to homeschool a child with autism who very much relates schoolwork to school. So, I mean, I have to admit, we ended up having to down tools with her because it was very difficult for her to grasp that we do a school day here. I mean, it was different for my younger daughter who was able to go on Zoom, and whenever she transferred to secondary school, then in September, she could see her teacher and see her class. But special schools, there was periods they had to keep closing too as well because a lot of the children were vulnerable or staff were off. So yeah.
Just finally, Denise, I mean, the Children's Commissioner will be speaking on Thursday, tomorrow, at the COVID inquiry. What message would you like him to pass on?
Well, I suppose a loss of education for any child is a disaster, a loss of exams a disaster, but equally a lack of planning is also a disaster. So obviously if something like this is going to happen in the future, there needs to be contingency plans. I know Boris Johnson said that they went too far the last time, but hopefully, if something is to happen in the future, that there will be plans in place that children aren't so negatively impacted again.